Hi, and welcome everyone to this second place shaping webinar. Welcome. By way of starting, I would just like to first acknowledge that I'm meeting with you from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their continuing care and custodianship of these lands, waters, seas and skies that I live, work and play on. Delighted to be here, convening the much needed conversation around city regeneration with three wonderful guests as part of this Okana series on place shaping. Okana is a global built environment consultancy of partners, three of which we have here with us today. Today's focus is on the key role that sports can play in activating spaces and places for regeneration. Building off the back of the Sport in the City research done by Jack and the team at Future Places Studio, we're here to discuss the potential for sporting facilities to act as a catalyst for city regeneration in a way that they can become permeable assets, inviting participation and connection for communities in place, enabling everyday access to sports for all. I'm Claire Bowles. I'm the Purpose Director at I2C Architects here in Melbourne. We're a B Corp certified integrated design firm that puts social and environmental value really at the heart of what we do. My work in regeneration has always been based around the premise that places shape people and their communities. The uniqueness of a place, its natural assets and socio-economic systems that shape it, it shapes the people it attracts, the services it offers, and the sense of belonging that it can create. I firmly believe that it's our role as placemakers and shapers to activate the evolution of places through community participation and co-design. This can bring the benefits of social cohesion, ecological restoration, whilst also bringing economic viability and vibrancy. In the context of increasingly dense urban environments that we see today, climate change and community well-being, cities across the globe are rethinking their approach to urban design to be more resilient and responsive to changing needs. And this is where our discussion today with Jack, Jeremy and Francesc will start. So welcome. Let's kick off our discussion today with by introducing ourselves and just sharing a little bit about what you're seeing shifting in the field of place regeneration in terms of social value, inclusion, and community participation. And I think we'll start with you, Jeremy. A little bit about what you're seeing shifting and what role sport can play in this evolution.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for Okana for the opportunity to be part of today's conversation. My name is Jeremy Salmon. I'm an architect and a place shaper. I'm also the founding director of Urban Place Network. We're a small, agile place and urbanism consultancy working across the world and an Okana partner. To start, I'm sort of delighted really also that we were part of and invited to be part of the sort of Sports in the City research with Jack. And so congratulations to Jack and his team at Future Place Studio and their lead in sort of bringing forth the sort of hypothesis that sort of greater social value can be generated through the urban environment, through enabling everyday access to sort of sport for all. And in reference to the question, Claire, I mean, we always start with the way that research is structured in two parts. It sort of points to the answer, and in reverse order. Sort of the second part is the more typical approach, certainly in sports-led placemaking, that focuses on the sort of direction of major sports infrastructure projects and their success or their imperative in creating long-lasting social impact. But the interesting bit, at least to me, is the sort of first part, which is the reverse order, which is focusing on the community upward city regeneration and how this starts to sort of happen and impact cities. I hesitate to use the word grassroots in the context of sports, but it's sort of that bottom up sort of shift. And I suppose today I'm sort of keen to sort of shine a bit of a light on governance, the governance of place. Again, that dynamic of top down or bottom up, and why sort of cities, because I mean, increasingly, as we know, we're all sort of living in cities. Cities need to respond more to our needs. They're more dense, they're more environmentally challenged, and you can make an argument that habitually urban proximity coming together brings cohesion around commerce and culture, cosmopolitan, and that sort of ability to be active in a career or in a business. But sports activities and physical activities as an urban objective, as a source for sort of social cohesion, it's becoming less and less prominent, certainly not spoken about as a principal driver for people wanting to come to cities or be in cities. Certainly when it talks to sort of physical activity itself as opposed to going to an event. There are arguments for and against. We sort of talk about the legacy of places like London, for example, but these are historic legacy investments in parks and that infrastructure. And increasingly, you sort of see the conventional custodians of the public realm, be it the local authority or local government, you see them retracting from that role. They're all looking to shut down their swimming pools and their sports infrastructure and the maintenance costs, etc. So you see a bit of a challenge in that sense, but I think there's a new focus emerging on integrating sports into the everyday across new groupings of place creators, investors, and curators. And I think that points to a sort of a general shift, an appreciation, and from all parties about the benefit of health and well-being at the forefront.
Absolutely. I think health and well-being is very much at the forefront of many minds. Jack, would you like to contribute there? What are you seeing shifting?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Claire. So I'm Jack Salabank. I'm the founding director of Future Places Studio. We're a research and strategy studio based in London. And as Jeremy mentioned, we led on the sport and the city research. It's interesting, I suppose, what led us to look at sport in the context of cities was, I suppose, two provocations, really. Like provocation one was around it's become harder in certain city contexts to do and participate in sport. It's arguably never been more important, as in many cities we're becoming less and less active. So provocation one really was to think about what can cities do to respond to that. And then provocation two was around the role of big stadia. What does big stadia mean in a city? No longer should they be designed just for the match day or concerts, and actually should they have more of a placemaking role in cities? So they were the two separate work streams that we were looking at in the context of everyday access to sport. And Jeremy's touched on a little bit of this, but I think what's interesting is that investors and developers doing big regeneration projects are looking to start to integrate sport into those projects, maybe in a slightly more interesting and agile way. I think it's less about building kind of big box sporting facilities and more about sort of more playful, free and accessible ways for people to partake in sport, and really using sport as a way to activate and enliven spaces. So I think that is it's a growing trend, and I think it's something we'll see more of in the coming years. And then I know we're going to touch on this throughout the rest of the webinar, but in terms of stadia, again, it's thinking about what role do they play in cities as an anchor to stimulate wider regeneration? How can they be an everyday asset for the city? And obviously to do that, we need to think about the design of stadiums and how they need to shift. And how can they start to attract a more diverse audience to want to sort of watch and partake in sport within those stadia? So it's an interesting topic from a number of different angles, and our research has kind of explored both.
Yeah, fantastic. It was a fantastic piece of research. So congrats on that one, Jack. I thoroughly enjoyed reading through it. And Francesc, over to you. What are you seeing shifting?
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and thanks, Jeremy and Jack, also for all the piece of work. Right, we went through that too. It's a lot of knowledge, and I think it's something that we are seeing in our industry. Oh, sorry, before I'm Francesc. I'm from Concepai. Our headquarters are here in Bangkok. We have projects around the Far East, to the Middle East too, and we've been working with this kind of like a big magnet work of anchors, right? We work with a lot of retail projects, mixed-use projects, but we also have this entertainment factor in many of our projects. And we see that the entertainment and the sports in many ways they relate to each other. But one thing, your question, Claire, and we were thinking about this carefully, and what is real shifting in regeneration in our profession, right? And we can say, and it's a little bit of a bold statement, but we can see that the rules are changing, and the rules are changing because the people's demands are changing recently. And I think we saw that an increase of that after post-COVID. I think we have post-COVID trends that they are looking for open outdoor spaces that require outdoor activities like sports, right? We can see an increase of demand on that from our projects. We also can see that new generations are requiring a different kind of interaction, right? And when we're thinking about design and urban spaces, in many cases we have to take a fresh approach, and many times in our office we kind of make a joke that this kind of like, in a way, what we learned over the past 30 years can be thrown away. We require a fresh approach a little bit in many ways. To put you an example, for example, we are in Egypt working a project that is very long. It's kind of like a 1.2 kilometers of mixed use. And even in Egypt, which is a main factor of the project is the retail factor, that part of the project, we are designing it with an open door idea, right? With canopies, with a lot of green areas. And we use that open door spaces to reduce air conditioning use, to increase that social interaction that we are talking about, right? These integrated spaces that let have more people, right? With activity, like more active activities, right? So we are really trying to introduce that, and in our work, right? Every day we can see a big shift, like the rules are changing.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, you phrase it as the rules are changing. Jack, just building on what you were saying before, around, I guess, the changing nature of sport facilities within cities, and their utility and the people who may be attracted to going there. I guess, how can we as designers approach our designs in a way that are empathetic of those who may be less competitive around sport, maybe less able-bodied, may, as Francesc mentioned, have the younger generation have different views around sport and coming together in different ways. I just wonder how we as designers best approach that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose sport is maybe sometimes the wrong word to use in this context, and maybe it's more about framing it around play. Um, Sport obviously creates, understandably, a kind of a connotations of being competitive, and not everybody is interested in that or and wants to do that. So actually, I think it's about play and creating the opportunities for people to play. And different cities are doing it in different ways. Some are sort of leaning on their sort of natural assets and sort of geographical assets, like if they have waterfronts, they're cleaning them up to enable people to swim in them for free. Cities like Paris are trying to sort of bring skateboarding more into the city centre and not sort of pushing it out to the extremes. We've seen some interesting projects in London where they're using the backs of shopping centres for people to essentially bash balls against, where previously, you'd have sort of no ball game signs up. Sports being used as an opportunity and sort of like a meanwhile strategy to again create sort of immediate activation of spaces. But again, I suppose to your question around what can designers do, I think it is that sort of contextualize it around play as opposed to necessarily sport. And we're seeing some sort of new sports emerge, things like paddle and pickleball, which are a lot more inclusive and seem to be taking off. But again, I think, they're just about play and about meeting people and about community and about enjoyment. For some, it will be about being super competitive, but I think for many, it's just about having the opportunity to feel part of a community and feel active. And then also, just final point, in terms of it, all of this has to be, I think, quite place specific. And I think what designers really should be thinking about is how they are answering or responding to acute challenges within those places. So, for example, if a project is being delivered in a place which has a particularly, an aging population, therefore, what is the most appropriate delivery for that population? If there is a problem around social isolation, for example, how can play be used as a means to bring people out of their houses and together? If there's a particular challenge around obesity or health and well-being, how can play and sport be used to try and tackle that? So I think it's not just delivering stuff in isolation because it feels like the right thing to do, but it's actually delivering stuff which is responding to a very specific societal challenge.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I love the framing of play, because no matter what generation or age you are, play is something that we all engage in. So it becomes a very multi-generational space. Just with regards to that, Jeremy, I wonder what your insights may be around what sort of governance models you're seeing that can actually support this reinvention, if you like, of sports or play in cities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of that sort of earlier introduction, really, about that sort of top-down, bottom-up approach. Really, you see a greater protagonism amongst people that weren't empowered or didn't empower themselves, really, to think that they could be an advocate for play. And I love Jack's rephrasing of that, from sport to the broader aspect of play. I mean, I sort of learned my lessons about sort of this sort of inclusive placemaking by working with in the last few years with a youth charity. Fantastic charity called Escape to Make. I mean, who are addressing mental well-being in 11 to 18-year-olds. Their secret sauce is sort of empowering these young people through the making and doing of things. But of course, in working with them and helping them to sort of realize their place, they were designing their place, their space to kind of be. But they brought an absolute highlight on the needs of the introvert, which is to say that, if your remit is to bring people in, then you've got to reach out to someone who's effectively hiding. And I think in the context of activities and sport, you think about that. Your placemaking approach needs to address not necessarily the people who are really active and into sport. They've got it already. It's the broader activation of a community. So I think the kind of, in terms of the placemaking, you need to take on board, I think, what Jack's sort of hit on the nail on the head, really. You create a sort of spectrum of activities, formal and informal. And ideally, I think what we're learning is that it's the integration of those approaches. So the informal spaces are somehow created through quite a careful managed structure of formal sports organizations and authorities and designers and communities to allow those ad hoc sort of place opportunities for those things to happen, and not be too prescriptive about what the activity, the sport play activity is. Allow people to invent play and their own conventions. So in a way, kind of as a place shaper, an architect, I think our opportunity, as well as to readdress the way we do our work and think about our role, is to sort of engineer the opportunities for spontaneous appropriation of place. No more that sort of keep off the grass mentality, but kind of foster a sort of sense of belonging, or even that the space belongs and is of the community, and it's legitimate to use your city spaces and places that occur in addition to the sort of formal sports venue.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Sort of claiming back the commons and the shared space, which is part of the living community. Francesc, we're obviously in times of climate change, rising temperatures and increased rainfall across many urban areas across the globe. I just wonder what you're seeing, or what designers, I guess, are thinking when it comes to designing for climate resilience, when we're thinking about this sort of reshaping of cities.
I think it's a very important point, because the trend that we are seeing here in Asia is that these facilities, right, either are sport or community malls, things like that, they want to be used as much as possible. So we've seen an increase of maximized usage. So if the facility can be used 24 hours, 7 days a week, rain or sun, right, that give more value for example, from one of these facilities like Jack is saying, like a big stadium, right? What we want to do that when there is no event. So I think that is a very important factor, how we can maximize the usage of the same facility in different ways. Flexibility is one, um, and also we have to be doing this by minimizing waste and energy use at the same time. Because if we use a lot of energy to do that, probably we end up losing the game. So I can put an example. We are working in Manila in a project that is just a community mall, and I would say like 50% of the project is outdoor spaces. We are doing a racetrack, running track. We are doing an event place that can be holding some sports events too. So we end up master planning a project that is mostly retail, right? But giving it back to the community and operating all these outdoor spaces with minimum energy use, because we're using canopy, no air conditioning. With the canopies, we can control the rain, we can control the sun, right? And then at all the roof areas, we have this kind of like a sky park, I can say, that increase that community, right? What we are talking is a community center where in the weekend everybody joins, go with the pets, people can run, and we are creating that from a commercial perspective, right? Which I think that's important. Um, so I would say maximize use, but minimize waste and energy.
It's fantastic. And I guess it's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about resiliency, we also need to think about what that economic resiliency and viability is. And I loved what you were saying, Jack, around actually the context and uniqueness that places offer. And you mentioned some good examples of where actually they're tapping into either their waterfronts or their natural assets. I just wonder what other examples there are of that uniqueness in terms of the service offering that we see, whether that's part of tourism or a wider offering emerging in cities.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe I'll take that from the point of view of stadia and what stadiums are doing in terms of that sort of unique offer. And it touches on your previous question to Jeremy around governance as well. I think we're seeing, particularly in a UK context, an interesting situation of a sort of potential public-private partnership between stadium owners and city councils around either the sort of redevelopment or development of stadiums, and thinking about what the role is that they can play in the sort of wider regeneration and socio-economic regeneration of that place. The sort of the primary example in the UK at the moment would be Old Trafford in Manchester, the potential redevelopment of Old Trafford. Will it, won't it happen? If it happens, will it be a sort of, modify the existing or knock it down and build a new stadium? If they build a new stadium, what's the wider sort of regeneration opportunity there? And they've brought a big task force together to think about that. And from the outside looking in, that very much looks like the club, i.e. Manchester United, and the sort of local council, City of Manchester, kind of coming together to say what's best for both. And I think that's really important. So it's not just about what's best for the club, but it's actually about what's best for the area. How can you create a unique offer which essentially creates a destination which helps to drive the local economy, but also how can you do it in such a way which benefits the local community? We've been, over the last couple of years, quite closely involved with various projects in the Olympic Park in London, and it's a very similar narrative which is playing out there in terms of the legacy of the Olympic Park. How can that place evolve as a kind of global destination which attracts people to it? But it's got neighbours around it that should be able to benefit from it as well. So again, what does that kind of perfect marriage look like, where you can attract people in, people can spend money, the economy can sort of thrive off the back of it, but also actually there's accessibilities and facilities that everyone can come and use on an everyday basis. And I think there's that gradual shift towards places which can deliver on both of those fronts.
Absolutely. Jeremy, are you seeing anything there around sort of the economic viability and services from stadia or?
Well, yes, stadium to a degree, but more or less on the sort of the city regeneration level. I think there's the obvious thing to say, really. There's no ready-made solutions, and everything is bespoke and has to be sort of created in an environment of innovation. And what we've started to see, I mean, we're involved in a project at the moment. It's a provocation project. It's a shared, in a way, a shared piece of research, but it's being carried by all the people involved as with an intent to do something and make a change. A project in Liverpool, where from the seed of an idea amongst a few protagonists over the last sort of year and engagement and through conferences and going to communities and talking to stakeholders, it's grown a legacy of all the conventional parties coming together, seeking that new innovative way to be useful and relevant in the context of what a city like Liverpool needs, and with its own specific health and deprivation issues, in the context of climate, in the context of economic issues and the lack of ability to invest within the conventions. And that's an interesting space in itself for everyone to come together. So it's not just your conventional design community. I mean, it's been heavily participated by Akana colleagues, particular Ryder Architecture have taken a great lead in that, but also the City Council, Liverpool City Council are involved, the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter, which is part of the city towards the east, where there is a lot of investment in a high-tech hub within its conventional red line boundary, but with the challenge is how can they spread that to the benefit of the wider audience. So that's private development organisations like Bruntwood Scientech, the NHS, the universities, Liverpool John Moores, local schools as well are now part of that process. We talk about that ability to co-design and reach out. So it's not just the conventional design communities, they're breaking their own governance, and it's young 11-year-olds designing what happens to the outside the boundary of their school along this speculative piece of green infrastructure that somehow physically connects, but also starting to connect or provoking the connection and do it different ways between communities. And projects like that, again, they gain resonance and I think currency, and then actually interactive involvement with the structure of governance. So you've got on one level, you've got the World Health Organization interested in that project, but also talking about their own particular agendas and tapping into that in terms of their urban policy briefs, which have recently come out, and we're looking to get Liverpool as a case study example within those briefs. They've got their own sort of young World Health Organization Game Changers initiative about young people and young people engaging activity as well. But again, sort of the last point, you see that sort of that innovation in the sort of way people come together and the way organizations come together across the board. So it'll be no surprise that the IOC now is talking to UN Habitat. They have a shared initiative, Sport for Sustainable Urban Development Initiative, it's called, where they're talking and presenting ideas to government level about advancing localization of their SDGs through sport. In the UK, Sport England's got its initiative, it's sort of 10-point activities for all initiative. Again, so that's sort of top down, seeking to readdress the way people come together. And then the less conventional protagonists are taking more of a forefront. The clubs, the sports clubs, with their fan base and their extension into the community. So you'll see certainly all the Premiership, but many other football clubs having their community foundation outreach and looking to engage at that level. And I mean, interesting, the research touched on the retailers, and Francesca's pointed to this. In the retail environment, you have the conventional retailers trying to move into that space, be it Decathlon, Nike, or recently we've done some work with IKEA or IKEA centres where their agenda is shifted away from selling stuff to actually this idea of meeting place making and gathering people together around that cohesion that activities, play and sport can bring.
Absolutely. I think just that bringing together through experience, certainly something we're seeing a lot of in our retail projects. I'm conscious of time, so I would like us to bring this to a close. But by way of closing, I wondered if we could just finish with 2 words from each of you. If you were to try and activate others to shape places that are lovable and therefore become livable, what would you say in 2 words to them? Jack, I'm going to pick on.
Thanks. Do I get to explain my 2 words, or do I just give you my 2 words?
You can do it however you'd like.
I think my 2 words are going to be free and play. Play has obviously been a bit of a theme of this conversation, and I think the word free is important because I think it's not just about facilities that people have to pay for. I think it's about free to access places which are good quality, not crummy quality, but good quality, varied, and encourage people to play. And I think that permission to play is super important. And then I think you can build off the back of that, right? It gives you the license to do something quite exciting as soon as you start to generate energy in place. And I'm biased, but I think the best way to generate energy is to sort of give people that permission to play.
Beautiful. Francesc, 2 words, and maybe a bit of an explanation behind them if you like.
Okay, maybe I cheat a little bit, go for the 3 words in my case. Yeah, so first one will be integrated, flexible, and for everyone. So integrated for the things that we discussed. You can enhance any sector, any use by integrating another ones around, right? And activating that space. Flexible because we need that resilience. So it can be support different markets, different waves, right? During the year, the seasons. And then the last one for everyone. And that's something that Jack touched before, right? And we are seeing also in our designs, how you design for everyone. And one of the key factors, we just had this discussion in another project, 4-generational could be a solution. 4-generation designs, which is for all the family. So these integrated places like integrated resorts that have a 4-generational experience, right? So all the family can go there and all the family can be all the week, all the weekend. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Francesc.
Yeah.
Jeremy, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm going to try and stretch the rules a bit as well myself. So the first word is sort of focused. If you think you're a sort of a conventional custodian of the public realm, whatever role that is, then the first word is redefine, and in brackets, your approach, redefine. And then the second word is sort of really for everyone. And there's a hyphen in between these two, which is get involved.
Really nice. And I think that's a wonderful way for us to end this webinar. So thank you so much, Jack, Jeremy, and Francesc for sharing your insights, and look forward to talking on another webinar with you at some point.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks.